So today, our very first day of actually reading stuff, we are going to cover Plato's text, the Phaedo. Plato, Phaedo, right? Rhymes. So, this is my first time diving into this one. I've never taught this text before. So it's a heavy dose of Greek philosophy today, all in sort of one book. It also shows you how Greek philosophy was written, as far as it being almost like a dialogue between characters. So there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to discuss there. It's a very heavy read. Talk about a doozy to give you your first read, right? It's a pretty heavy subject matter, right? Socrates' death, his forced to death, right? He didn't really have a choice in the matter. It was his execution, pretty much. And all this discussion about different things. So there's discussion about the soul, right? Does the soul exist? How's the soul part of the body? Right? There's questions like that here. There's ethics questions here, like especially like why is suicide not okay? Right? There's discussion of these things that we call forms, which is part of Greek philosophy, which I will talk to you guys more about. Also opposites. So much of Greek philosophy is based on opposites, like hot and cold, dead or alive, right? So much of their reasoning in this thing is backed up by these opposites, which we'll try to untangle as we go today. Body and spirit, right? That's another one. Go ahead. Want to say something? So I'll start class off today, give you guys a little bit of lecture about Greek philosophy, and then we'll get you guys reading experiences. I'm sure that some of you guys probably want to put me in a headlock for making you read this. Right? But hopefully by the end here, you'll appreciate it more after we've untangled a bunch of its ideas. Next week will be more traditional. I mean, whenever we come up with the idea of literature, right, it includes stuff like philosophy. When it comes to our understanding of the Greeks, we have to understand their philosophy as well as their literature to sort of get a good sense as far as like what makes Western culture. So all this philosophy today will be helpful. And so this is the kind. If you guys ever take a philosophy class, this is the kind of stuff that you would read for the most part. So mind tanglers to say the least. But Greek philosophy, of course, whenever we talk about the Greeks in general, right? So one thing that you have to keep in mind is Greece is surrounded by mountain ranges. So whenever it comes to the idea of Greek culture, right, it was surrounded by mountain ranges. But of course, there's all these different city-states, all these different countries within Greece, in ancient Greece. You had the most famous ones, of course, are Athens and Sparta, right? Athens and Sparta were the two big ones. Athens was more of the culture powerhouse of the two. Sparta, of course, was the more militaristic powerhouse of the two. Not to say the Spartans certainly had their own culture. Most of what we have left over for us today is from the Athenians when it comes to literature, philosophy, things like that. Philosophy started with a bunch of different thinkers. Before Socrates, you had philosophers like Themistocles. You had Pythagoras, right? I know you guys know that name, Pythagoras. Right? Where does that name come from?
Pythagorean theorem.
Pythagorean theorem, right? Yeah. We had Pythagoras had this whole worldview about different things. For instance, Pythagoras thought that music was math, right? Music is math, and it's all its perfection, right? That's one theory that he espoused. Right? So anytime you have a good musical composition, it's almost like mathematical one, and it's like precision. So music and math, those are two subjects you probably didn't think would align, right? But whenever it comes to Greek philosophy, the big powerhouse, though, of course, starts with Socrates. So the three most famous Greek philosophers were almost like it's almost like a family line, right? You have Socrates, you have Plato, then you have Aristotle. And Aristotle was Plato's student. Plato was Socrates' student, right? So we have lots of writings from Plato and from Aristotle, but we really don't have a lot of writings left over from Socrates. Pretty much everything we know about Socrates comes from Plato. This is one of the main texts where we actually get Socrates as sort of a literary character. Right? He's a historical person, but he also is kind of like a literary character in this too. But of course, you guys know, some of you guys are teachers in here. Tell me how Socrates has influenced teaching.
Sorry, what was the question?
Some of you future teachers in here, tell me how Socrates has influenced teaching. I know you guys know this.
What? Socrates. Oh, okay. Okay.
Philosophy.
Yes. Okay. It was like breaking up. Okay.
I don't know.
There's the Socratic Method. I'm not really for sure like what all goes into it, but I know there's something called the Socratic Method, isn't there?
Yes, you're exactly right. Socratic Method. Socratic Method is kind of like what I'm doing to you all right now, right? I'm asking you questions. This is how you learn. You learn by answering questions. Like whenever they're positing arguments and stuff, instead Socrates would then sort of ask more questions. So it's just an endless array of questions to get at some sort of truth, right? Lots of teachers teach this way. I'm not fully Socratic with how I teach, but lots of times, like you'll have teachers who will like randomly call on you, for instance, like you'll be kind of sitting there dozing in class, then one calls on you, right? What do you think about what's going on in this conversation? Right. So then you're just like, I don't know, right? Everybody's been there at some point. That's what we call the Socratic method. This is what's at work here in this text. Socrates, even right before his death, is still acting as teacher to all these different guys. Right? They're trying to come up with ideas like, does the soul exist? How's the soul part of the body? All this different type of stuff will unravel. So what's Socrates do? He doesn't give them any answers. He just keeps asking more questions. Right? That's hence the fact we have a long dialogue here between Socrates and his followers. So hence the Socratic dialogue. Like I said, we don't know anything about the real guy. All we have left over is Plato's account. there is some speculation that Plato didn't like Socrates for whatever reason, right? Maybe he was jealous of him. Maybe he disagreed with him on a lot of his ideas. There is some indication that the real Socrates might have been a little different than he's actually portrayed by Plato. But mostly in this text, it's a book written by Plato. Mostly we get a lot of like Plato's ideas about the world and how it works, how it ticks, the body and the soul, where do we go after we die, all these different types of things. This is almost like a religion class today, right? We're asking a lot of big questions here. And one thing I'll definitely be interested to hear from you guys on today is how much the Greeks had in common with later Christianity, how much they're different too. That's something that I'll be interested to hear you guys talk about today a little bit. But Plato was a widely influential philosopher, but Aristotle was by far the most influential of all of them. Aristotle's the guy who actually sort of divided knowledge into all these different subjects. So you had stuff like biology, right, or physics, or literature, or history. Right? Aristotle is actually the guy who divvied up all these different types of knowledge into these different classifications. So he has a book called Rhetoric. He has a book called Physics, right? So he has a book called Metaphysics. He's the guy who kind of divided knowledge up into all these different traits. And his influence, both Plato and Aristotle's influence were so big that these two guys dominated Western thought for probably up until about 1500 AD. So they were writing around 300 BC or so, and then their writings were the most widely read writings all the way up until about 1500 AD or so. So these two guys, they are foundations to understanding like who we are as Western European, as the Western world, right? People who descend from Western Europe. A lot of the reason why we still have these guys' writings, we do owe a lot to the Roman Catholic Church. You guys know that after ancient Rome fell, it's oftentimes called like the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, right? There wasn't a lot of intellectual stuff going on, right? It was mostly people just trying to farm and survive, right? There wasn't a lot of time for philosophy or literature or whatever. It was mostly people just trying to make it without the Roman powerhouse. So the reason why we even still have a lot of these books today, like the Phaedo, is because the Catholic Church preserved them through the centuries. So there's actually lots of speculation about how many books of ancient Greek philosophy or whatever are still down in the archives of the Vatican somewhere that we don't even know about. Right? Because the church throughout its long history has been prone to censorship, right? So there's actually lots of speculation, like what if Aristotle wrote another book, right? What if they're hiding it from us still? That book might be sort of antithetical to Christian doctrine, for instance. So there's lots of conspiracy theories about that type of stuff. Only people who have access to the Vatican archives will ever know, I suppose. It's a bigger mystery than who shot JFK, right? For this is like who shot JFK for nerds, right? But yeah, we do owe a lot to the church for preserving all this old knowledge. Back in the day, as far as the actual process of writing a book, there wasn't a printing press, right? So in order to actually have a copy of a book, the book had to be physically written down or copied, right? So like if you were a student back in the day, let's say you had your biology textbook, well, you would copy your biology textbook in its entirety. So nowadays you feel bad about spending $100 for a book or whatever, right? But imagine copying the whole thing now, right? That's what they had to do back then. There was actually a great library of books in Alexandria, Egypt, called the Library of Alexandria. And that library burnt down. I forget what year it was, but that library burnt down. It's like, imagine even then, all the old books from ancient Greece and Rome might have burnt, and there might not have even been another copy of them. Right? So it's a little bit of a crazy thing to think about, but that's used to be how literature was written down. Was it actually being copied over and over and over again? Only when we get to the Renaissance around 1500 or so, that's when we get the printing press, when they could actually print stuff quickly and widely disperse it, and things like that. So that's a little bit of the technicality, like how do we even handle it? It's a little bit crazy to think about. So where to go from here then? As far as the Greek culture goes, we also owe a lot to Alexander the Great for sort of spreading Greek culture. Like I told you guys, Greece was surrounded by mountain ranges. It's kind of insular. Right? Greek culture really didn't spread anywhere besides Greece, during these days. So we owe a lot to Alexander the Great for conquering pretty much all of the Western world, for spreading a lot of these Greek ideas, all these Greek books of philosophy and literature. So when Alexander conquered, he conquered France, he conquered Spain, the German territories, right? He went all the way almost to China. Alexander the Great's empire was pretty much the entire, what we think of as the entire Western world. And naturally, with Alexander's conquest, the books dispersed, right? The books and the ideas from the books spread all across the Western world. It's like even when we think about like what's Western lit, right? So much of that is, we owe that to Alexander the Great, right? Without him being war hungry and wanting to conquer everything on earth, right? It's hard to say if Greek philosophy would have even extended beyond just Greece. So he did all this by the time he was like 32 or 33, by the way. He died at a very young age. Alexander conquered pretty much the whole world before his early 30s. So if that's I don't know if that's something that you could use to motivate yourself or feel more sorry for yourself. I don't know how you guys feel about that, right? I'm about his age now. I'm 33, so yeah, I haven't conquered the world, so woe is me. Right. So yeah. Of course, we also owe it to the Romans too for keeping a lot of this Greek stuff alive. As we'll see over these next couple of weeks, whenever we talk about the ancient world in this class, we mostly spend time with the Greeks. With two exceptions. You've already read one exception, and that was Catullus, the Roman poet Catullus. We're also going to read some Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid, which is the Roman epic. Just like how the Iliad next week's the Greek epic, the Aeneid is the Roman epic. For the most part, the Romans innovated in other areas, right? Romans innovated in things like engineering, law, the study of law, right? Romans innovated in that kind of thing. Not so much literature, or there was a lot of Roman literature, don't get me wrong, but their innovations weren't so much in literature or philosophy as they were in the practical things, right? Law, engineering, and that type of thing. So that's where the Romans' influence were. But the Romans kept a lot of these old Greek ideas around. Right? The Romans actually accepted the Greek gods as their own, even. So they renamed them, of course. So you guys know Zeus was Jupiter, right? Ares, the god of war, in Roman mythology is called Mars. Venus in Roman mythology is Aphrodite in Greek, right? So they just pretty much just changed all the names around to make them Roman, right? But why they did that's an interesting question, right? The Romans sort of had a big ego complex, right? Even though they didn't come up with these ideas on their own, right? They still thought they were superior to the Greeks, right? So hence the fact they renamed a lot of the gods and stuff. But since I'm on the subject of mythology real quick, I should also probably make a quick mention of that, how that contrasts with philosophy here. Right? Because you guys, I'll turn the floor over to you guys real quick. What's your guys' especially before next week, there's going to be a lot of mythology next week. What's your guys' experiences with Greek mythology and the Greek gods? Like, how much do you know about them? That's a question for all of you here. I'm sure all of you can pitch in on this one. What's your experiences with the Greek gods?
I used to read a lot of like the myths, probably in like middle school, high school, like a lot of, like I read, like my favorite one's probably like Orpheus, and I guess you pronounce it Eurydice. But other than that, like I haven't really read a lot of it here lately, but I used to read a lot of it when I was younger.
About the rest of you? Lauren, I saw you.
I've also read a lot of it. I've recently read a book about Hades and Persephone.
Right, they're a very complicated relationship, right, to say the least.
I know some of the names, like I know about them. I haven't read like in depth, but I know about them.
Name a few of the heavy hitters for me.
I don't know if it's the Greek or what
Right.
you were talking about, but my favorite is there one that had wings that flew towards the sun that they burn off or something?
Yep.
I don't know their name, but I can remember that one.
And one with a horse
Yeah, that's a classic story. That's Icarus.
Icarus, yes.
He wasn't a god. He was a mortal, I think. He flew too, like he got too close to the
God.
I'm not sure. Hercules and I know Hercules and I remember Aphrodite and Hades and those names.
And the ones that were with Hercules. They're so weird name you can't remember them. So
How many of you guys know about the Greek gods from the Hercules Disney movie?
I really like Troy, the movie Troy.
oh, I love that movie.
That's one of my favorite movies.
And like, what's another one?
Now, that movie will come up next week because that's pretty much a movie telling of the Iliad.
Yeah,
We're gonna-
yeah. Um,
Is
that
there
I
300?
had read that in high school, and it's like words, like when you're not understanding something, and then I watched that movie years later, and was like, wow, like it brought a lot of it together.
There's a very good Netflix show called Troy too, which I would recommend. It's pretty much a show about what we're going to read next week. I would recommend that for you guys who are interested in watching some stuff that we're doing at the same time in class.
And what was it?
I will watch that.
It's called Troy too.
Troy. Okay, and it's
On
a
Netflix.
show, Netflix.
Yeah.
I probably will watch that because I haven't had a lot of experience with things like this class and mythology, so I don't know a whole lot about it. So I probably will do that. So
Right. Did any of you guys learn about this stuff in high school, or was most of this stuff just stuff you found in media?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a class that was similar in high school, but I don't remember a whole lot from it. I remember, I feel like I heard Aphrodite before, but other than that, I didn't learn a whole lot from it.
I know
Steve?
personally in middle school and high school, I learned a lot from the Greek and Roman mythology, and actually Egyptian and Norse mythology too, from the Rick Riordan books, Percy Jackson, and all that stuff.
So you read those types of books for fun, right? During those years. That's how you learned a lot about it.
I would
Yeah.
watch like TED Ed videos or just like research a lot of it on my own, like in my free time, or like I'd like read little like books and stuff. But that's how I learned about it.
Yeah, this is something that she should have learned in social studies at some point along the way. You would think. I know from my experience teaching this class, I have widely differing people on this stuff. Like I've taught this class before, and I have some students who know more about it than me. Right? Like some students like get really hardcore into it. But yeah, sometimes there's not much experience with it at all, which is fun. One thing to note about Greek mythology is it's very pessimistic. Right? It's very pessimistic, especially compared to the Hebrew, the Judeo-Christian tradition. Right? Very pessimistic. So all these gods in Greek mythology are pretty much out to service themselves, right? They don't really care about humanity so much, right? They're mostly concerned about themselves and all their grievances with each other, right? One god always wants to get something on the other god, right? They want to play, there's always these petty sort of disagreements between them. People get in the way. Right? People get in the way of the gods. So, yeah, this isn't, it's a very pessimistic tradition too. This comes up in Plato today. It's a very, Greek philosophy is actually a lot more hopeful than Greek mythology. This comes up with the afterlife too. The Greeks thought everybody pretty much went to hell in the afterlife. That's Hades. Right? Doesn't matter how good of a person you were in your life. It just doesn't matter. Everybody, when they die, goes to Hades. Right? In Hades, there's different. It's kind of like with Dante's Inferno later. There's different layers of people and where they're at, and like how awful it is down in Hades, right? But it's not really good for anybody. Right? It's a very pessimistic outlook. Like, what's the point of even trying to live a good life in a way, right? If you think after you're dead, you're just going to go to hell, right? So what's almost the point of living on a day-to-day basis in that sense, right? Unless you just want to be a good person in general, right? No matter what the consequences are. But face it, the threat of the feeling of an afterlife motivates a lot of people, right? Oh, I better be good. I don't know if I'm gonna go to hell in the afterlife, right? Everybody went to hell in Greece. So yeah, not a very not a good look, right? To say the least.
But didn't the worst of the worst go to Tartarus, or however you say that?
Yeah, that's the very worst part, right? So nobody really has a good though, as far as that goes. But there's definitely differing layers of hell and different punishments, just like how there will be when we read Dante's Inferno for what we think of as hell. And it was a lot of the same in a bunch of different other cultures in the Western world. Like you had Greek mythology, you had Egyptian mythology, Norse. I don't know. I'll be frank. I don't know a lot about Egyptian mythology. Norse, I know a little bit about just from different types of media. But those mythologies are widely different than the Greeks as far as like their views on things. Of course, you guys know in the Norse was a warrior culture tradition. So their idea of heaven was stuff like Valhalla, right? Where if you died a noble death on the battlefield, right, you'll go to heaven, you'll drink in the halls of Valhalla, right? So in those types of cultures, the afterlife was for people who fought well in wars and stuff. And then, of course, we have the Judeo-Christian tradition, right, which sprang up in the Mid East. As we know, eventually the Romans accepted that. Right? After a certain time period in the Roman Empire, they no longer worshiped the old gods anymore. And Rome eventually became a Christian empire with the Emperor Constantine adopted the Christianity as the official religion of Rome. So eventually, like the Roman gods, they sort of faded out. Right? So nobody worships them really anymore, right? It's just mythology at this point. It's kind of crazy to think about how they once held a grip over a good part of the world, and now nobody even thinks of them that way, right? So, philosophy, of course, widely differs from the mythology. So, segueing over into talking philosophy now, Plato's Phaedo. You guys first tell me like what your reading experiences with this. I'm sure all of you had to take your time with it to kind of pick up on the arguments that were going on. What was your guys' reading? Be honest, right? What was your guys' reading experience?
It was kind of hard to understand at times.
For me too.
I don't know if I was saying names right. Like
The names were so hard. I hated the name.
you're like, I don't even know if I'm calling them the right name. So
Yes.
yeah.
Throwing me because they start talking at the beginning about Socrates dying, and then in the middle of it, he's talking to somebody.
Right. They're kind of having like one final sleepover or whatever, right before Socrates has to drink his poison, right?
Yeah, what did he do? Why was he sentenced to death?
He was sentenced to death this was during the Athenians' war with the Spartans, but he was accused he was pretty much accused unjustly of like corrupting the youth, giving the youth unsavory ideas, right, with his philosophy.
Educated.
Did it say piety too or something? What was that?
Yeah, like, I don't know a lot about that, but there has been they leveled accusations against him too, of like impropriety with his students, things like that. A lot of that was was frankly BS, right? It's a classic case of someone in power, right, using their authority unjustly. Right? Socrates did not deserve to die. He drank the hemlock poison. Hemlock poison. Basically, what we get from the end of this, the poison pretty much just spreads across your whole body and makes you numb, right, until it gets to your heart region, which then stops your heart, right? It's a very horrific way to go. You feel it every step of the way, right? As far as death coming at you, right? Very, very bad way to go. You drank it. That's how you consumed it.
That would be horrible, especially because he was in front of all the people and his friends. It was very sad.
Yeah, this I have a book here. Of, I don't know if you guys can see it with my virtual background here. Let me just show you the picture. I'll share the picture with you instead. This is the classic art picture of Socrates' death. Pull a good one up here.
You mentioned the Christianity, like as I was reading it, I kept thinking about the Last Supper as I was reading.
Oh.
Like it had a lot of the same. I don't know. I could see a lot of similarity in the
time period, just everything.
Just how there was the men together, and how he said, I sent the ladies away because so they wouldn't cry, and just I don't know, some of the things he said, it's just I don't know, it was real biblical to me.
Right. Right. That's fun too, right? Because this was before the birth of Christ.
Yeah. Right? It kind of made me wonder. I'm not gonna say what I wondered about, but like you were saying, and underneath the Vatican, and whenever you said that, I was like, oh, I had those thoughts earlier.
Right. Well, I think it's a safe statement to say that when Greece, that culture merged with the Hebrew culture, right? Like things happen, right? So
Yeah.
Greek ideas got meshed in with Hebrew ideas.
Oh yeah.
It's a classic case of two cultures colliding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the death of Socrates, like how much did that influence like the way we think of the Last Supper?
Yeah.
Like if you look at the art here, I don't know if you guys can see this. I have it pulled up here. The art, that's Socrates kind of drinking his poison, right? Of course, the art's from Renaissance Italy, but very famous picture. But the art's very similar to something like Da Vinci's Last Supper.
Yes.
Right. So I think you're exactly right to point that out. And so this text and its ideas, the ideas that it has within it, how much it compares and contrasts with Christianity, that's going to be a fun thing to discuss.
Especially when it talks about your soul and if it exists before you live and where it goes after. That is especially very widely dealt with Christianity.
Yes. It's the age-old question. Like what happens?
Still that question. Like still ask that question.
Yeah. In this text, Socrates pretty much espouses that the soul does exist before someone's born, right? A soul exists independent from a body. When the soul, he pretty much argues in this thing, when someone's born, that's the soul then sort of being locked into a body. He compares the body to a prison, right? It's almost.
I never thought about it about before, like your soul existing before you were born. I always knew I grew up in a Christian home, and I always knew you either go to heaven or hell, but I never had thought about it before you're born. Like, is your soul there before you're born, or is it not? I never had thought about it like that.
Right? Well, in Christianity, right, it doesn't, right? Your soul's kind of born when you're born into your body.
Right.
So this is definitely a different idea than we're used to. This idea almost seems kind of Eastern in a way, right? With stuff, this seems kind of like a Hindu idea almost. But yeah, the soul exists independent from the body. But the question is then, where is the soul then if it does exist before you're born? They seem to suggest in this thing that souls are constantly recycled. So like whenever someone dies, whenever the soul goes back to Hades, maybe they're there for a while, right? Maybe they then have to live as an animal for a while or something, which is interesting too, because that suggests that animals have souls, right? That's a debate even within Christianity, right? Whether animals have souls or not, like people. But if a person gets reincarnated into an animal, right, then obviously the animal has a soul in Greek mythology or in Greek philosophy. But yeah, what are some of the rest of you guys think of this idea, like the soul existing before the body? Does that make sense to you, even if you never thought of it that way, does that change your thinking about anything?
I was thinking too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was thinking too that it was very, very similar to Hinduism, but like the Hinduism belief in like incarnation and reincarnation. Because right now I'm in a world religions class too, and that's what we're reading about right now is like their belief system. So like, I mean, I think anything's possible though. So
Right. These are definitely two cultures that did not collide, which is interesting. Like ancient India and ancient Greece did not collide like in any way. So it's interesting that they do have similar ideas about stuff. Someone else was going to say something?
I just thought it was very interesting when he talked about the soul. He always referred to the soul as her.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah. He talked about the soul being her and in different places. And I was like, so maybe.
Yeah, I didn't notice that. I'll have to go back and read that again. That's interesting. If the soul was labeled as feminine, right?
Said she and her, and yeah,
I noticed that too.
yeah.
Yeah, you picked up on something I didn't there. That's really interesting. Like, is a soul naturally feminine, right? Does it like what happens in that process? That's definitely different than Judeo-Christianity, right? Or God the Father, right? God the Son, God the Holy Ghost, right? If it puts the soul as more feminine. But some of the rest of y'all, what do y'all think of this idea of the soul being independent from the body and it existing before you're born? Tough.
I don't know. I can't get there with it. I don't understand it.
Okay.
I was always raised in a Christian home, so
Right.
it's hard to explain.
Well, so a lot of to answer that question, you like Timothy or Tim? Where do you go about
Timmy.
Timmy? Yeah.
Yeah.
So to answer that question, a little bit of discussion about what Plato meant by the ideas of forms is probably necessary, even to understanding the soul argument. Plato had this idea called the theory of the forms. Right? So Plato argues, and this shows up periodically throughout this text. Like it's kind of hard to point to one place in the text where this shows up, but it is dispersed widely throughout the text. The text is labeled according to numbers and letters, right? That's how you get.
And it's capitalized. I noticed forms was capitalized.
Yeah, the word forms capitalized. Right? I wrote down 75 C and D as far as a place where this is discussed. Let's see, start. But to define what we mean by the idea of form, so let's take, for example, the concept of beauty. Oh, let's use beauty as an example, right? The idea of what makes something beautiful, right? This is a question of aesthetics, right? What makes something beautiful? Is beauty something that's universal? Right? Is beauty something that is universal? Right? Is there a universal definition of the term, or is beauty subjective? Right? The old saying, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Right? Is what's beautiful to one person not beautiful to another? Right? So, is there a universal idea of beauty, or is it relative? Well, Plato thought that whenever we talk about the idea of forms, he thought that it's maybe like a separate reality somewhere. There's a perfect representation of that idea. So it doesn't. I use beauty, but let's talk about even like a desk, right? Whenever we talk about a desk, right, you guys might be sitting at one right now. A desk is made of wood, right? It has certain qualities about it. Well, somewhere in another universe, right, there's a perfect representation of the idea of a desk, right? There's a desk that's completely perfect, right? There's no other way you can make a desk, right? It's a perfect desk. Or if we talk about beauty, right? Somewhere in another universe, right, there's this perfect idea of beauty, right? Something is always beautiful. It's perfect. And that exists outside of our human experience. Right? We can't really understand what the perfect ideal, what the perfect representation of something is. So Plato said that we live our life almost in a shadow world, right? Whenever we talk about a desk, right, we obviously don't have a perfect desk. Whenever we talk about something like beauty, we have an imperfect understanding of beauty. Because beauty is a concept that exists outside of our experience, right? It's something that's independent from our reality. So am I making sense here as far as like what this is? I see some confused faces here.
What was your question? The video kind of went out for a second.
Am I making sense here with my definition of forms? Like the perfect form exists outside of our reality. Does that make sense? So beauty is an example, right? Maybe we have a concept like truth, right? Or honor, right? Any adjective like that, right? Somewhere in another universe, right? There's a perfect representation of that. On Earth, it's impossible because we live in a body. because we're trapped in a body, it's impossible for us to understand these ideas in their perfection. So that's the idea of forms. Part of the reasoning here, as far as why he says that why the soul exists before you're born, he says that the soul was part of that reality before. So somewhere like you were in that universe, like where you were understood that perfect idea of honor or beauty or truth. And they even argue in this text, like, what is learning? Like, what's the process of learning? Like, what happens when you learn something? Well, in this case, using the forms is an implicit argument, right? He says that when you learn something, Socrates says at one point in this text, whenever you learn something, it's your soul remembering something that it already knew, right, from that previous existence, right? So that's what he says, that learning is an act of recollection. So if you learn something, like when you're a kid, like maybe you learn the alphabet, maybe you learn math, right? Well, when you're born into this body, your soul forgets all that stuff. But but the process of learning is your soul remembering it. So learning is recollection. And if learning really is a recollection, then that implies that the soul does exist before you're born. Right? So that, again, I'm twisting a lot of arguments together and trying to make them digestible for you here. But that's even like the text idea of like, how do you learn? How do you come to know things? What do you guys think of all that?
It reminds me of deja vu, just like how people say you had an alternate life before and you remember stuff, and they call it deja vu. So
Yeah, deja vu, you're exactly right. That's that idea in a nutshell.
It's very deep. Philosophy is very deep.
It is. It's fun, I think. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's fun, like thinking about this stuff.
Philosophy makes you think. It makes you think outside the box.
Yes.
Yes. I
And
took a
I
class at
like the way. I'm
Impossible.
sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Timmy, you say you took philosophy before?
At WVU, yeah, it's been, oh gosh, 2007, I think it was. So it wasn't very fun.
Right. Certain types of people enjoy philosophy. Like if you're a type of person that likes to ask questions, right? Philosophy is a subject that appeals to people like that. If you're the type of person to say, well, who just accepts certain things as truth, like even like religion, right? Like if you accept certain things as universal truths, philosophy is kind of a hard thing to grasp, right? Because you don't really ask a lot of questions about the meaning of the universe and like, does our soul exist and all this stuff.
The one
I thought
ethics.
fun.
What was ethical and unethical?
Right. Yeah, ethics is a part of philosophy. Usually when we talk about philosophy, there's different layers of it, of study. So you have logic. Logic is the tool that philosophers use. If you guys, I don't know if you go, one thing I want to point out here about this text is almost mathematical, right? All these arguments they're pointing out. So like you could almost diagram these arguments that they're pointing, like they're mathematical. Like for instance, when I said a second ago, recollection. Recollection is the body is the soul remembering what it already knew. Well, Well, if we take that idea, then it follows that the soul must have existed before the body. Right? Even my saying that's almost a mathematical statement. I'm setting out a proof here. Right? I'm saying, well, the soul exists before the body. Before the body. This is the proof. That's kind of like almost how Greek philosophy works. Right? It's almost mathematical in the way that it lays out ideas and the precision that it uses. It's not grounded in reality in any way, right? Because how can we just measure this in reality? Right? We can't. Right? We can't prove through science that the soul exists. Right? Science, that's a matter of faith. Right? We can't prove through science the soul exists. I don't know if you guys know, there actually was a guy once who tried to prove that the soul existed through science. His name was Duncan McDowell. This is a fun little story for you. But Duncan McDowell, around the turn of the 20th century, so around the late 1800s, early 1900s, he came out with the hypothesis. He said the soul exists, and I can prove it. So what he did was he went around. He like got wind that someone was getting ready to die or something. Like, so what he would do, this sounds really creepy, right? I can already see Emily smiling over there, right? This seems a little creepy, right? But he went around and he weighed these people like right before they died, and then like after the moment of their death, he would weigh them again, and he did take into account things like gas leaving the body, or maybe when someone dies, they poop their pants and stuff like that. The loss of mass that way. He took all that into account, and he found out he only had 7 or 8 case examples of this, because this is all the people that allowed him to do it. But he found in each case the body lost 21 grams, right? 21 grams. So he deduced from that the soul must exist, and the soul must weigh 21 grams. Right? He also tried this experiment on dogs, and when dogs died, they didn't lose any mass at all. Right? So he said this is the difference. Right? Humanity has souls, dogs don't. Right? Here's the soul weighs 21 grams. Right? What do you guys think of that? Like, what's wrong? What's wrong?
Dogs aren't the same as humans, so you can imagine that their bodies work different than ours. So it's not really something that you could probably determine if they have a soul or not,
Right.
because they may not decompose like we do. You know what I mean?
All I know is my dog better make it to heaven. All I know.
How big was the dog?
That's a good question. I don't know that right off. He did measure a bunch of dogs though. It wasn't just one. He measured a bunch of dogs. Found out in each case it didn't change. So, well, there are certain branches of Christianity, right, that even argue that it's only humans that have souls, right? That animals don't. You guys shaking your heads. Is that something that you guys have heard before? Like I saw you shaking your head there, Lauren. Is that something you'd heard before?
Me and my cousins grew up on that movie, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and we were all up there talking about it on my grandma's one day, and she went off on us telling us that they didn't have souls, and we were like, well, they made a movie about it, so it must be true.
Yeah. Yeah, here's a classic case of what are you all think, right? You know, Kyra just said her dog better have a soul, right? But what's your guys' take on that question? Do you guys think animals do? They clearly think so in Greek philosophy, right? What do you guys think?
I think they have intelligence. So I think where they have intelligence, they have to have a soul of some sort.
Right?
I've always been told that animals don't have a soul and they're not going to heaven. And I couldn't quote it, but my grandma says it's in the Bible.
That makes me really sad.
Me too.
I've always
What do
felt
you-
like your animals can sense, like if you're grieving, because they'll always come to you.
Right? Some animals too are very individualistic, right? Some animals have their own personalities, right? Each dog is different than another dog as far as like its behavior and how it acts, things like that. I have a cat. I can tell you that she's her own personality, and there's no other one like her. I can tell you that.
If my cat has a soul, it's evil because she is evil.
Of course, in ancient Egypt, they worshipped cats, right? They thought that they were protectors. They protected you from things, from evil spirits. Like that. They were the protectors, right? So that's a fun little fact for you. Yeah, so lots of you guys are telling me, hey, I grew up with this argument, like the soul animals don't have souls.
I don't feel like animals have souls. I can't really give you a reason why. I just feel like I grew up that way, that like she said, and I just feel like it's kind of, it seems silly that an animal would have a soul. So
Right? Why do you say that?
I don't know. I've always wondered because they do have personalities. They have mannerisms. You can train them. You can teach them. So I've never really thought about it that deeply. So I don't know if they have a soul or not because I've never thought about it.
Right. Well, the question is, can animals in the Christian sense, like can animals sin? Right. Well,
That's a good question.
Arguably not, right? That's
Right.
That's a condition unique to humans.
No, they have children out of wedlock. That would be a sin.
Right? They don't put a ring on it before they have babies, right? So those darn animals, right? But when Adam was alone in the garden with the animals, right? He was lonely, right? He didn't have a companion, so that's why Eve was created. So that's another argument for why they don't, right? That they don't, they're not the same in that way. Like they live their lives, they eat, they sleep, they reproduce, right? What's the meaning of their lives beyond that? I guess that's kind of, but that also raises other questions, like if animals' lives are, if animals don't have souls, like how does that justify? Does that justify that you should treat them well? Things like that. So that invites even more questions. And so if they don't have a soul, why should you treat them well, right? You can make that argument. So go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm not an animal person myself, but like I work at a job where like you see a lot of animals come in. I work at Tractor Supply, so like we get like a lot of people who bring their pets in. And like people are sometimes when people come in and they buy dog toys, they talk about how they're buying toys for their babies. And sometimes I don't know if they're talking about a dog or an actual baby. So like I think that they're a living creature, so you should just treat them well regardless, even if you don't believe they don't have a soul. But that's just my opinion.
And I think today that you can think what's like everything else, you can think whatever, if you think that that is, if that makes you feel better that your dog's going to go to heaven, like do all you can, like the guy said in the book, to live a good life and make it there. And if that makes you feel better, believe that your dogs will go to heaven with you.
Right. So if it works for you, it works for me, right? That's kind of what you're saying here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, these are questions that we all have our own answers to, right? There's no universal answer to any of these questions, right? Maybe there is, but we'll never know. According to Plato, that's because we exist in a world of shadows, right? Where we can't ever know these things, what's true and what's not. Aristotle rejected that notion, right? Aristotle said we can explain the world. We explain it through things like science, right? So Plato's worldview is more spiritual, and Aristotle's was more in the physical world.
See, I thought that's what they were arguing about in the story. That's what I got of it. I got that they were like iffy about him killing himself, like, and it was argument over where his soul was going to go or something like that. And I guess I was putting Christianity views in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this text is very adamant against suicide. Right? It's very anti. This is a very anti-suicide text. Try to find the exact passage for you. It's in 61, going into 62 as far as the numbering. Let's see. That's when they compare the soul to being in like a bodily prison.
I like how he told them that they shouldn't fear death, that by leaving the body, they were going to be with the God that created them, and they were going to have all of these great things that were going to happen, versus being afraid of death. I think we as a culture, we more expect death as something that comes after us rather than something that happens internally to us.
Right, that's at the very end, right? His friends start weeping, right, because he's getting ready to pass. He pretty much tells them, right, what you just said, right? Don't fear death, right? We've already accepted this truth that the soul exists before the body, right? The soul won't die when the body dies. So what do we got to worry about? That's kind of what he says there at the end. That's an attribute to this argument that Christianity has accepted, right? The soul doesn't die when the body dies, right? It goes somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? If you're an atheist, right? If there is such a thing as a soul, right? It dies when you get put in the ground, right? It no longer exists in anywhere, right? When you're dead, right? That's kind of the physical view of things, right?
Yeah, he was very okay with dying, and however, whether it was someone killing him or him taking his own life, he was okay, or he was okay with dying, and what was going to happen after he died.
Yeah, like she said, I was reading this where I didn't get to read a lot of it. I skimmed through the beginning and the end. I saw like towards the end, his friends like start weeping and sobbing, and he looks at them and he's like, I sent the women away so I didn't have to deal with this. So you guys need to dry it up, basically.
Yeah.
So he was okay with it, but no one else was.
Yeah.
He was almost giving like the being real masculine at the end, right? Man up, guys. Don't cry. Right.
Like maybe they would talk him out of it.
Right.
I think
He-
how we face death is dependent upon how we have lived. If we've had a fulfilled life, then we aren't afraid of death. But if we have a lot of regrets and resentments about things that we did not do, I think that's where we are afraid of death.
Right.
I feel like he was so accepted of his death because he considered it the will of God, so of the gods. So he was just, doing what was asked of him from a higher power.
Right. He's almost accepting of
Yeah.
the creed almost.
Yeah, that's what made him so accepting of his death.
Well, that's just like in Christianity, they obviously believe in heaven or hell, and you go your whole life and you have to accept the fact that you're going to die. So then you choose whether you want to go to heaven or hell, whether you get saved or you don't. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's the same concept. So you have to just accept the fact that you're going to die and be at peace with it. Know where you're going to go.
Right. He had accepted the premise that his soul would go to Hades and then it would be back again at some point, right? So he went into his death with that acceptance. He could have probably escaped his punishment. Like, he could have fled, right? He could have once the new power regime took over in Athens, he would have probably been fine after, right? This was an unjust government forcing him to do it. But he could have left. He could have fled from the hills and escaped that. But he decided to take it, right? So whether you want to say that, it seems like this, based on what you guys have said so far, I think he's kind of noble for that, right? He accepts his death. We all die. Doesn't matter if it's now or if it's 10 years from now, right? We all die. So that's kind of, you guys seem like you sympathize with him a little bit in that way. Am I right in saying that?
He had also made the statement for someone to pay off his debts. So I think it really spoke a lot about, because he said that he was looked down upon for the type of husband and father that he was. But whenever it come time for his death, he really showed his true colors and the type of person that he was, because he was worried about looking after them and paying off his debts. And
Yeah, you're right to point that. I'm glad you pointed that out, right? That very in detail, right? What's his last words? Hey, pay this guy off for this bill I owe.
Yeah.
Right. Of all dying thoughts to have, right? Pay this guy off, right? Bill I owe. Right. That's probably the last thing most people would think of. That's what Socrates thought of. What was it exactly that he said? Let me look again. Let's see. He said, Credo, he said, we owe a cock. Please pay the debt and don't neglect it, meaning a chicken, right? He said, give a shibboleth, I think, the chicken, right? That was hand over the chicken, right? That was his final words. So do you guys think Plato painted a good portrait of Socrates here? Like, some people say that Socrates seems like a know-it-all, right? He's condescending, right? Did you guys get that out of Socrates here, or did you think he's noble and all that?
When especially coming from someone, and you say that he had issues with Socrates, so especially coming from someone that had his problems with him, I think it speaks very highly of him.
Right? Plato wasn't there to witness this. I do know that. Like he's telling this story of the arguments and all that from offhand accounts. Some of these dialogues, Socratic dialogues that he wrote, he was there for, but he wasn't for this one. I do know that. So he's telling this from offhand accounts from what other philosophers told him. It said, I read in a footnote, it said he was sick, right, with something when all this was going down.
I just Googled, I'll just be honest, I Googled why Socrates like chose death, and this link says at age 70 he had no real family life and could go out quickly in good health, avoiding the slow deterioration of aging and the likelihood of its diseases. So that's an interesting point.
Well, I don't, what source is that? Where'd you see
Let
that?
me see. I don't know if it's an accurate source. It looks like it's on WordPress, so I don't know if it's a good source or not.
Well, we do know that Socrates is married. His wife is painted in this text as being like very naggy and very overly emotional, right? That's one reason why they send the women away. Right? Socrates doesn't want us there screaming and crying, right? When he dies. Like, yeah, I don't know about that. Just because it wasn't about
I didn't read, like I said, I didn't read the whole text, so that's probably, but I was just curious, so I Googled it.
more about like accepting the fates and all this stuff. That's another question that the text sort of invokes. Like, do we make our own decisions in life, right? Or are our own decisions predetermined, right? By God, for instance. Right? Even in Christianity, right? If we accept the fact that God is all-knowing and all-powerful, then that we take a Calvinist point of view, that assumes that God knows whether you're going to be saved or damned before you're even born. Right? So do you have free will to make your choice about whether you're going to be saved or not if God already knows that before you're even born? Right? There's a brain teaser for you. Right? But like certain sects of Christianity argue that, right? We don't have free will. God does decide even before you're born what soul is going to go to heaven and what soul is not. They even call that the elect. Right? God has chosen a certain number of elect to go. I think the number is like John Calvin said there's like 164,000 people in all of human history, right, who will actually go to heaven. He actually came up with a number. Am I saying stuff you guys have heard before? I see over there, Keela, you're smiling, right? So it seems like you've heard this before, right? Well, Socrates accepts the inevitability, right? He didn't make this decision, right? It's something that fate has decreed for him. Whether you even accept the fact that you have the freedom to make your own decisions, whether God or someone else makes the decisions for you, right? That's another big philosophical question that is interesting to talk about. I've already blown your guys' mind enough, right? That's another one, right?
Hey, I don't want you to forget that I'm Nicole and this is Keely
Hey.
because their names are not up
Yeah.
there. Just as long as that we get credit for being here today.
Gotcha.
God, thank you.
You guys will probably go veg out after this class, after thinking through all these big ideas. Well, now that we've digested some of this stuff, talked about it, like, it is a hard thing to, all this stuff's hard to grasp on the first time, right? But now that we've all talked about it, like, you guys appreciate this stuff a little bit more now after we've all chewed on it a little, right? I'm seeing some nods here. Yeah, philosophy's not easy. It's not an easy subject. But I do think of it as literature, right? Especially this stuff, all this stuff about the soul, what the soul exists, and all of this. This is foundational, not to who we are as people, especially people in the Western world. Except, like we said, alluded to a minute ago, people in the Eastern world have a different worldview about how the soul one. And you know, a lot of they think that there's one big soul, right? And we're all a part of that big, the big soul split up, right? We're all parts of that one giant soul, right? That's very much simplifying it, but that's in a nutshell what they think, right? We're all part of one universal soul. Western philosophy is all about we're all different souls. The soul is something different for each person. Eastern philosophy, not so much. We're all in Eastern philosophy, you're all part of one giant soul. But that's another subject. That's if you take the second part of this class, the non-Western live. That's for someone who knows a little bit about that more than me. Right? So for next week, we want to read the Iliad. Right, you're going to start the Iliad. So this will be more of a traditional lit. I like to do this first because I know you guys all. Well, it's good to get the philosophy stuff, but you all guys also wait for your books the first week and all that. So that's why I always give you the PDF the first week. But next week, I'm assuming you guys will have your books. So we'll start with the Iliad next week. But all the stuff we talked about today, the Greek mythology and the idea of the soul, and do you come back, and all this stuff will show up in the Iliad. And the Iliad, I should say, was produced well before even this was. This came about during the golden age of Athens. The Iliad was even before stuff was even written down. Right, the Iliad was a poem that came about. People recited it. It was a public performance. That was a form of entertainment. The story was passed down generations to generation, and that's how it was retold. Eventually, somebody wrote it down. So it's the author is oftentimes called Homer, right? But we don't know if Homer was a real person or not. Right? It's passed down. But you guys will see a lot of the stuff show up with that text. Give you guys a bit of a preview for that text for next week. Here's the story. Here's the subtext for the Iliad, how it gets started. So the Greek goddess, three of the Greek goddesses, Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena, right? They all being Greek gods, right? They're all out to prove like which of us is most desirable. Right? That they were vain, right? They wanted to figure out which one of us was most desirable to mankind. Right? So they found this random shepherd named Paris, which is what the city is named after. It's the old mythological figure Paris. So they came to him. They had a contest. They said, which of us is most fair? Which you guys know, Hera was Zeus's wife, right? Aphrodite was the goddess of beauty and sex, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Right. Well, each goddess said, whichever one you pick, we'll give you a prize. Well, Paris, being the stupid idiot man that he is, right? We men are all like this, right? Being the stupid idiot that he was, rather than going with smart Athena over here, right? He decided he's going to pick Aphrodite, right? The goddess of sex and beauty. Right? So her reward to him was she was going to give him the most beautiful woman in the world. And that woman was Helen of Troy. Well, the problem was Helen of Troy was married to a Greek king. Right? Helen of Troy was already married. So what happens then? This Paris running off with Helen starts a war between the Trojan people and the Greeks. And hence this what we think of as the Trojan War started. So that's a little bit of the subtext. Whenever you start reading the Iliad, you'll find out that it starts right in the middle of the action. Like all that stuff I just said has already happened. So you guys will actually get kind of thrown right into the fire. Like the war is already going down, right? When the Iliad starts. So you'll be introduced to characters like Achilles and Achilles and Hector really early on. The two famous heroes of the Iliad, Achilles on the Greek side, Hector on the Trojan side. So I think even your first reading from the way that I did the readings next week, the next Monday, your response on Blackboard's just like the first little chunk of the Iliad. Then you're going to read another chunk for the big class next week. So you're going to read 2 parts of the Iliad next week. The first chunk will be for the Monday. Then we'll talk about that in the next big chunk on Thursday. Okay, so that'll be kind of how we divvy it up. So I think I'm only dedicating 2 days to the Iliad. Let me double check before I say something wrong.
And both of those are in the textbook.
Yeah. Well, so good question. Some of it is in the textbook, and some of it is on a PDF because for some reason or other, they cut a bunch of really important scenes out of the textbooks. So there is a couple of different parts that you'll have to read on the PDF I'll give you. Okay.
And that's for the Iliad, right?
Yeah, the Iliad next week.
Okay.
Is it okay to do your discussion post on Monday?
What is it?
Is it okay to do the discussion post on Monday, or does it need to be turned in before Monday?
You can be done on Monday.
Okay.
Thereabouts. There's no set time that you have to submit it. Like you can be 11:59 at night, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Usually I'll try to read those on Tuesday or Wednesday. Like that'll be when I get to those and send you feedback on them. So that'll be when I traditionally get to those. So next Monday, I'm going to look at the syllabus here. It'll pull up. So next Monday, you're reading apart from book 1 of the Iliad, and that's in the textbook on page 138 to 51. And then you're going to read another part that's on a PDF file. And that'll be the same for next Thursday. You'll read a selection from a PDF file, and the other selection will be from the book. So I'm pretty much filling in with PDF files, important chunks of it that you need to get a sense of some of these characters and stuff like that. It makes me scratch my head why they cut one of the parts you'll read on a PDF, because it's one of the most important parts of the whole thing. Makes me scratch my head a little bit. So I'm giving you those extra parts you need on Blackboard on the PDF. Okay, I've already have the questions and stuff ready for that, where I've taught that before. So right after this class, I'll enable those questions and get them up for you. So you don't have, unlike this week where I was a little late getting questions because I had to reread and prep again. I don't really have to next week because I've read the Iliad a million times. So you'll get those questions up tonight for next week. Okay. And the readings, the PDF readings, you'll get those up tonight too. So you guys have any other questions? You guys feel good? Okay. So good class, good discussion. This was some heavy stuff. So I'm glad I made you all appreciate philosophy a little bit more, I hope. I'm trying to actually revive the philosophy class here at Southern. We have a philosophy class that no one has taught it in forever. I'm trying to work on them to let me teach it. So maybe in the future we'll have it again here. So that should be it for the night, though. We won't go to the full 8 tonight. I think we've done enough for today. Okay. So you guys don't have anything else, we'll call it a day. You guys take care. Enjoy your weekends.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well,
Thank you.
I have a
Remember,
question about
it's,
the Iliad once they leave.
okay.
remember, I'm Keely, the blonde hair, if you can tell.
All
Nicole Lee is the dark hair.
Blonde and brunette. That's how I'll remember you all.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Well,